Hey guys, I'm Apples and Dragons, and I'm back to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. And I think the topic for today is going to be the Night of the Laughing Tree. Part, what is it, 6? 7? Let's see. This will be part 6. Holy smokes. Don't worry, we haven't even gotten started yet. The things I've talked about are some of them are pretty in-depth, but most of it's like preliminary stuff. Like first impressions, this is what the story is on its face kind of stuff. But we're getting a little deeper into things each episode, so hopefully that'll continue. What else do I need to say in the introduction? This is my Song of Ice and Fire show. If you haven't read all of the books, you probably shouldn't be here. This is for people who've read all of the Ice and Fire books by George R. R. Martin. They're very good. I recommend them. I'm going to grab a Storm of Swords so we can get started. It is on page 282 or something. Hey, I got it. Let me get my notes open here. All right. I'm going to sort of backtrack because I've said so many things in about the Night of the Laughing Tree story so far, as told by Mira Reed, that I haven't proven. I've just said that I'll prove it later, or proof pending sort of things. And there are also some things I brought up that I didn't finish talking about. And there's some corrections I need to make, because things I said that were wrong. So, hopefully the whole episode won't be me backtracking, but I think even if it is, you'll enjoy it, and you won't feel like we're going backwards. I just tend to get ahead of myself. I'm so damn excited. Alright, so I might be getting ahead of myself with this one again, but I want to talk about the 5 to 7 paragraph interruption of unnecessary filler. It's an interruption to the Attorney of Harrenhal story as told by Mira Reed that happens during her telling of it. So one of the topics I went over, I think in the last episode, was that the way the characters are engaging with the Attorney at Harrenhal's story is mirroring in many ways the way the reader is engaging with it. And I said that right after I pointed out a 5 to 7 paragraph interruption to the Attorney at Harrenhal's story. And the reason was because that 5 to 7 paragraph interruption is another way that the character's interaction with the story is mirroring the reader's interaction with it. Mira said, 5 days of jousting were planned, she said. There was a great 7-sided melee as well, and archery and axe throwing, a horse race and tourney of singers, ... Never mind about all that. Bran squirmed impatiently in his basket on Hodor's back. Tell about the jousting. As my prince commands. In these 7 paragraphs, Mira begins telling parts of the story that Bran doesn't care about, because he considers them unnecessary filler. I also said that Mira can represent the author, because Mira and the author are both the storyteller, and Bran can represent the reader, because Bran and the reader are both the audience. Bran is Mira's audience, and you and I are George R. R. Martin's audience, or A Song of Ice and Fire's audience, however you want to look at it. And I also said that the Attorney at Harrenhal's story was designed by its in-story author, Howland Reed, for a specific purpose, meaning that it isn't an authentic telling of what happened at the tourney of Harrenhal, the way that you and I might tell each other a story about something interesting that happened to us. We would just say what happened in the order that things happened, if we're telling it well. And we'd probably flavor things a little bit in our own biases and perspectives. But the details like specific words, tonality, and framing and all of that would not be very finely tuned to control the way that people perceive it. But the Tourney at Harrenhal story is, because Howland Reed carefully crafted it for a specific purpose. And I'm not going to tell you what that purpose is, at least not for a very long time, if ever. What I'm going to do is give you the tools to interpret the story yourself. And when you have enough tools, I won't have to tell you what the story was crafted to do. You'll have worked it out for yourself. At least, that's my goal with this series. Anyway, so this 7-paragraph interruption to the Tourney at Harrenhal story is a part of the A Song of Ice and Fire story that was not designed by Howland Reed. Because there's no way Howland Reed could have predicted that Bran and Jojen and Miro would have this conversation at precisely this point of the story, between said a prayer to the old gods of North and Neck and the daughter of the castle was the Queen of Love and Beauty. So forget about Howland Reed's intentions for a minute. Let's consider George R. R. Martin's intentions. If you could wipe your memory of this Tourney of Harrenhal story and experience it again for the first time, fresh and with no idea of what happens in it or what you ought to think about it, how do you think you would interpret the story differently with this 7-paragraph interruption completely removed? Think about it for yourself for a minute, and then I'm going to continue by rereading the paragraph before the 7-paragraph interruption and the paragraph after it. Are you ready? Here we go. Then, as now, she agreed. The wolf-maid saw them too, and pointed them out to her brothers. I could find you a horse and some armor that might fit, the pup offered. The little crannogman thanked him, but gave no answer. His heart was torn. Crannogmen are smaller than most, but just as proud. The lad was no knight, no more than any of his people. We sit a boat more often than a horse, and our hands are made for oars, not lances. Much as he wished to have his vengeance, he feared he would only make a fool of himself and shame his people. The quiet wolf had offered the little crannogman a place in his tent that night, but before he slept, he knelt on the lake shore, looking across the water to where the Isle of Faces would be, and said a prayer to the old gods of North and Neck. As my prince commands. The daughter of the castle was the Queen of Love and Beauty, with 4 brothers and an uncle to defend her, but all 4 sons of Harrenhal were defeated on the first day. Their companions reigned briefly as champions, until they were vanquished in turn. As it happened, the end of the first day saw the Porcupine Knight win a place among the champions, and on the morning of the second day the Pitchfork Knight and the Knight of the 2 Towers were victorious as well. But late on the afternoon of that second day, as the shadows grew long, a mystery knight appeared in the lists. Now, a question. What did the crannogman pray for? You might have said the mystery knight. You might have said vengeance or revenge. You might have said justice or synonyms of any of those words. Retribution, to even the score, to get back against the squires and or their knights, to right a wrong in the world, or anything like that. But let's suppose for a minute that the crannogman's prayer in reality was not about any of that, and what the in-story author is trying to hide is what the prayer was really about. If that's the case, imagine you're Howland Reed. How would you change the story as I just read it to make it less likely that the person you're telling it to, or any audience, would ever consider that the prayer was about something different? Having the Mystery Knight appear in the paragraph immediately after the prayer was said makes it pretty obvious that the story was designed to suggest that the prayer was about something that would result in the Mystery Knight appearing, either praying for revenge or praying specifically for a Mystery Knight or any sort of champion. So if you're Howland Reed and you're designing this story and you're trying to hide what the prayer was really about, you don't want the prayer and the Mystery Knight appearing to be right next to each other, one paragraph after another. That's too obvious. So what do? You add a big old section about a great 7-sided melee, archery and axe throwing, a horse race, and a tourney of singers. You fill the story with a bunch of unnecessary filler to create some space and padding between the prayer and the Mystery Knight appearing. Now your audience is going to be way less likely to say, the story's obviously suggesting that the prayer was what caused the Mystery Knight to appear. So maybe that's not what the prayer was really about. So this one paragraph within the 7-paragraph interruption, where Mira talks about the other tourneys that happened at this 10-day event at Harrenhal, it's a part of the tourney at Harrenhal story that we don't get to hear, except this small part of it. And its role in the tourney of Harrenhal story is to be unnecessary filler, to create space between the prayer and the Mystery Knight appearing, to make it less obvious that the story was designed to make it seem like the prayer was about the Mystery Knight rather than whatever it was really about. So the tourney at Harrenhal's unnecessary filler is happening within A Song of Ice and Fire's unnecessary filler, effectively labeling this 7-paragraph conversation interruption between Jojen, Mira, and Bran unnecessary filler. I think that's really cool. Now we have a brand new question to ask about the tourney of Harrenhal. What else might the crannogman's prayer have been about, if not about revenge? And maybe that's a more useful question about the tourney at Harrenhal than who was the Mystery Knight. I'm going to put on the brakes again. We've come to another threshold in our analysis of the tourney at Harrenhal, where I have to stop. We're very close to a discovery that I'm not ready to give away. But there's something for you to chew on if you want to. What else did I want to talk about? Oh, this is good. I think this next topic is the reason I did an episode about subtext, where I talked about the conversation between Varys and Illyrio. But I didn't know at the time that that was my reason. I just felt like I should do that episode. In episode 15, subtext in A Song of Ice and Fire, Ned, Cersei, Varys, I said that throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, 3 dots represents that something is missing. And I need to expand on that because I meant it in a bigger way than it probably seemed. In the conversation between Varys and Illyrio, the dots represented literal words that were spoken between Varys and Illyrio that were missing. But I said it's even worse than that because since the chapter is written from the POV of Arya, the dots also represent words that may or may not have been spoken between Varys and Illyrio, and therefore may or may not be missing. Because whether the sounds were muffled or didn't happen at all, the reader isn't allowed to know what they are either way, because Arya doesn't know. So, Much like the subtext of Illyrio's comment had more than one potential meaning. If one hand can die, why not a second? The dots actually have two potential meanings. As the reader, how do we resolve the conflict in the interpretation of the dots? Do they mean words that were spoken are missing? Or do they mean words that may or may not have been spoken, may or may not be missing? And we resolve it by recognizing that stories are supposed to be wasteless. And this is just another one of those eternal rules or features of good storytelling. Just like the one about the characters are not allowed to spoil a mystery for the reader. A good mystery, anyway. In the case that the dots mean words that may or may not have been spoken, may or may not be missing, there are two cases within it. Either words were spoken and they're missing, or words were not spoken and they're not missing. In the case that words were spoken and they're missing, the dots are too important to the story to be removed from the story, because they're telling the reader that some words that were spoken are missing here. But in the case that words were not spoken and are not missing, the dots are not important to the story and can be removed from the story without changing its meanings. And that means that we can safely assume that the dots must represent words that were spoken and are missing in Aerys and Illyrio's conversation. Cool, huh? So in Aerys and Illyrio's conversation, what's missing are literal words that were spoken. But that isn't always the case in A Song of Ice and Fire. Sometimes what's missing where there are dots is something less tangible, such as context that the character has but the reader doesn't. In that case, the dots still represent that something is missing, even though no words were spoken. What's missing could be context. So the meaning of the dots in A Song of Ice and Fire is essentially something is missing. And perhaps that implies figure out what. That was a pretty detailed note. And so the reason I went into this explanation about the dots in A Song of Ice and Fire is because 3 dots happen at the line, and so the little crannogman's prayer was answered, ... by the green men, or the old gods, or the children of the forest. Who can say? And in the last episode, I sort of opened up a can of worms with that line, because I called into question whether or not it's explicitly telling us that the crannogman's prayer was about revenge, or whether it's just suggesting that the crannogman's prayer was about revenge. I think what I actually said was about the Mystery Knight, but I should have said about revenge, because summoning the Mystery Knight is just a subcategory of revenge. Because even if the Mystery Knight was a result of the crannogman's prayer, it's unclear whether the crannogman would have prayed for a champion to joust on his behalf, or for the power to joust on his own behalf. But either way, the motivation is revenge, or justice, or to get back at the squires in some way. I'm just going to call it revenge, but I should call it revenge or justice until we've talked about the revenge versus justice theme in A Song of Ice and Fire. But I don't know, maybe not, because that is actually a debate that this Turney and Harrenhal story throws up into the air. To split the interpretation across the Knight of the Laughing Tree's motivations. So it's fine. Anyway, so the dots in that line, and so the little crannogman's prayer was answered. If the story's implicit suggestion that the Knight of the Laughing Tree's appearance in the lists was caused by the crannogman's prayer, then the line, and so the little crannogman's prayer was answered, ... is literally telling us that that's what the prayer was about. But if the story's implicit suggestion that the crannogman's prayer was about revenge or summoning the Mystery Knight, Then Mira's line, and so the little crannogman's prayer was answered, ... is a lie. And if it's a lie, then Mira's cheating. Because one of the rules of mystery writing, good mystery writing, is that the storyteller is not allowed to cheat. He's not allowed to outright falsify the narrative without putting away in the narrative to find the truth of it. But there is an interpretation of Mira's line, and so the little crannogman's prayer was answered, ... in which she's not lying. She's actually telling the truth. Maybe what she's doing is she's relying on the reader to pick up the story's implicit suggestion that the prayer was about summoning the Mystery Knight or revenge. In that case, the line, and so the little crannogman's prayer was answered, might still actually be true. Maybe the little crannogman's prayer was answered. It just wasn't what we think it is. By the green men, or the old gods, or the children of the forest, who can say? So what else could the crannogman's prayer have been? I said I wasn't going to go further than that for a long time, if ever. So I'm going to stop there and move on to the next subtopic of the Night of the Laughing Tree story. What did I have here? Oh, a small correction. I said that the Green Men was Bran's first idea of who the Knight of the Laughing Tree was. That was wrong. His first idea was the crannogman. His second was the Green Man. And then he goes back to the crannogman. But they're both kind of the first idea, because they're just textually handed to us, the readers, by the character in the story, who is literally saying this is who he thinks it is. So if Bran is right about either one, it would be pretty bad mystery writing. On the face of it, anyway. There are ways it could still be good, but until we find one of those ways and it's cool, odds are against it. It was the little crannogman, I bet. No one knew, said Mira. So there's Bran's first guess, immediately after the knight appears. That was all, just a small correction. What was next? Last time I said that Aerys the Mad King is basically a Song of Ice and Fire's Hitlerian figure. He's the historical figure who everybody refers to when they want to impress or assert the idea of ultimate evil. And I said a Song of Ice and Fire's fundamental challenge to the reader is to put himself in the shoes of each character to see the situation from their point of view. So Aerys being a Song of Ice and Fire's poster child for evil makes Aerys the ultimate challenge for the readers and characters alike to put themselves in the shoes of Aerys, to see his life, reign, and downfall from Aerys' point of view. Now, when you ask people to look at anything from the Mad King's point of view, what happens is people act like you're suspect. They become suspicious of you, like you're trying to defend an evil person or the evil that he did. But really, you're just trying to gather the information that's most likely to have been overlooked. And the only way to do that is to approach the situation wearing Aerys goggles. Supposing that regardless if a person is evil, that never means that he was wrong about every single thing he ever said or did. It's impossible to be wrong about every single thing all the time. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So what might Aerys have been right about? And what might we gain from learning of it? And so that's why Aerys was actually right, is the theme of Aerys. Because it's a way of interpreting the story and the Mad King that yields the other side of the story. And that interpretation is going to be inherently biased for Aerys. Because, of course, in the same way that a person can't possibly be wrong about every single thing he ever said or did, he can't possibly be right about every single thing he ever said or did. Because that would be perfection, which is unattainable. But the purpose of the exercise is to basically get the other side of the story, get Aerys' side. And then once you have it, then you can weigh it against the first side, that Aerys was wrong about everything, and then go back and forth between them and find a balance in the interpretation of, okay, one side was partly right and partly wrong, and the other side was partly right and partly wrong, and the truth of the situation is something in between. So, even though the statement Aerys was actually right about everything is obviously wrong, in the context of the audiences and the characters' derangement about Aerys, that he was wrong about everything, it's the most useful interpretation to apply in order to suss out the story's themes and the answers to its mysteries. And what you find when you apply that theme, that Aerys was actually right or good, what you find is a massive webwork of information that has in fact been overlooked, both by most characters in the story and the people who are reading it, like you and me. It's so much information, in fact, that altogether it constitutes a completely new and logically sound narrative of the fall of Aerys Targaryen, different from anything we've heard before. And that also happens to be undisputably more credible than the old narrative of the fall of Aerys Targaryen. One example I gave was that the histories depict Aerys as though he was tripping over his own contempt for Tywin when he named Tywin's son and heir Jaime to the Kingsguard, specifically to piss off Tywin, or stick it to Tywin or whatever. And then in, I think, A Storm of Swords, in the Jaime chapter, Jaime has a memory of Cersei coming to him and floating the idea that he can join the Kingsguard so that he'll get to live in the Red Keep with Cersei and continue being by her side and having sex with her. And then Cersei said she'll do the rest, presumably going to Aerys, or at least his people, and saying, suggesting that they invite Jaime to the Kingsguard. So with that bit of backstory, we can significantly exonerate Aerys of the crime of specifically trying to annoy Tywin with this decision to invite Jaime to the Kingsguard. It wasn't even Aerys' idea. It was Cersei's idea, and Jaime agreed to it before the idea was ever brought to Aerys. And with that, you can imagine a more sympathetic characterization of Aerys' point of view. Tywin's own daughter came to Aerys, or at least to his people, and said, hey, my brother Jaime, he's 16 or whatever, 15. He's a very good swordsman, and he'd be a great addition to your Kingsguard. And who knows what she actually did, right? That's one of the mysteries I need to think about, is what exactly did Cersei do when she said, I'll do the rest, and somehow set up Jaime being invited to the Kingsguard? I think there was a Kingsguard who died, and that's why there was an opening. So maybe Cersei is the one who had him killed. His sigil was a sleeping lion. Who was that? I don't know. But anyway, you can see how Aerys inviting Jaime to the Kingsguard might have actually been an authentic attempt on the part of Aerys to reconcile the relationship between Aerys and himself and Tywin. Where he's like, well, okay, me and Tywin are not getting along. We used to be really good friends. Maybe this will help bury the hatchet. I'll bestow this great honor upon his son, and it'll sort of bring our houses together by making us a little more dependent on each other, where I have to depend on his son to protect me, and his son has to depend on me to be a king worthy of protecting. And then I consider, well, that's a little too generous of an interpretation of Aerys, because Aerys and Tywin were very deeply steeped in a very long-running conflict, a tension in their relationship, and it's almost inconceivable that those resentments did not play some role in Aerys' agreeing to add Jaime to the Kingsguard. So in the balance of Aerys was wrong about everything and Aerys was right about everything, what I find is a more interesting and truer to life interpretation of Aerys Targaryen, the man, that makes these parts of the story much richer than they were before, with either one of the single-minded modes of interpretation. And that balanced interpretation being more interesting and complex and truer to life is itself what seals the interpretation into place as the most canonical interpretation, assuming that it fits with everything else about the situation that we come across, and consistently adds truer to life complexity to all of those situations too. At the end of the story, Bran thinks the story would be better if the Wolf Maid is crowned the Queen of Love and Beauty, but crowned by the Knight of the Laughing Tree, not Rhaegar. Meera says she was, but that's a sadder story. Meaning the Wolf Maid, Lyanna Stark, was crowned the Queen of Love and Beauty by the Dragon Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. And it was a big scandal. It basically started the whole war, Robert's Rebellion. That was the moment when all the smiles died, according to the memory of Ned Stark. Since Meera Reed and George R. R. Martin are both storytellers, Meera Reed can be symbolic of George R. R. Martin. And since Bran is Meera's audience, and we're George R. R. Martin's audience, Bran can be symbolic of us, the audience. The Tourney at Harrenhal story can be symbolic of the A Song of Ice and Fire story, because they're both stories. And we've already talked about the number of ways the character's relationship to the Tourney at Harrenhal story is mirroring the reader's relationship to it. So when Meera neglects to tell Bran that he's missing the deeper meanings of the Tourney at Harrenhal story, it suggests that George R. R. Martin treats his audience the same way. And when Meera references the Dragon Prince crowning the Wolf Maid, it suggests that George R. R. Martin is treating his audience the same way, regarding the mysteries surrounding what all really happened between Rhaegar and Lyanna. To Bran, the Wolf Maid being crowned the Queen of Love and Beauty is hers and the Knight of the Laughing Tree's reward for being the heroes of the story. So that's what the Wolf Maid being crowned the Queen of Love and Beauty means to Bran. The metatext of Meera's comment is something like, what the Wolf Maid being crowned the Queen of Love and Beauty means to Bran, and what it means to the audience, both demonstrate a misunderstanding of the story that the storyteller is not inclined to correct. George R. R. Martin is going to let us carry on in confusion about the Rhaegar and Lyanna situation, just like Meera is letting Bran carry on in confusion about the meaning of the Knight of the Laughing Tree situation. So the questions we have to ask ourselves are, what does Rhaegar crowning Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty mean to us? And how does that demonstrate our misunderstanding of the deeper meanings of A Song of Ice and Fire? However, if the Knight of the Laughing Tree's motivation was to avenge the crannogman, then all of this metatext and these questions are wrong and useless. So in the interpretation, there's a fork in the road that happens precisely at the question of the Knight of the Laughing Tree's motivation. One fork leads to the changes Bran made to the story. The story will be better if you get rid of the squires and make the knights more directly the villains, who beat up the crannogman. And if the Knight of the Laughing Tree wins the whole tournament, and the heroic girl, instead of disappearing into the forest, the other fork leads to Bran is missing the deeper meanings of the story, and Mira isn't telling him how or why. And that could be symbolic of us missing the deeper meanings of the story, and George R. R. Martin not telling us how or why. So it isn't just the Tourney of Harrenhal story where the interpretation splits at the Knight of the Laughing Tree's motivation. The whole A Song of Ice and Fire story splits there, because the questions of what happened between Rhaegar and Lyanna are so central to the story that they touch everything in it. They touch the question of who Jon Snow's parents are, whether or not he's really a bastard, who Azor Ahai or the prince that was promised might be. They touch the Harrenhal conspiracy, because this all happened at the same tourney at Harrenhal. They touch Robert's rebellion, because this is where the first seeds of the war were sown. Just on and on, right? What was the Knight of the Laughing Tree really primarily trying to do? To avenge the crannogman, or to get the knights to teach their squire's honor? In Grey Sheep and Hedge Wizards episode 10, I talked about Ned's decision to send Beric Dondarrion instead of Loras Tyrell to bring Gregor Clegane to justice for terrorizing the Riverlands. Ned thought Loras wanted vengeance, and he contrasted that with justice. But it isn't obvious why Ned thought that, because it isn't obvious how Loras is motivated by revenge in the conventional sense. Loras Tyrell is from the Reach, and Gregor Clegane is terrorizing the Riverlands, not the Reach. The conventional meaning of revenge is that there's something personal at stake. But on the face of things, Loras has no personal stake in this situation at all. That is, until you pay attention to Loras' behavior. He wants to be the one to bring Gregor Clegane to justice, because he's out to distinguish himself. So that's Loras' personal stake. To Loras, it's more about making things better for himself than for anybody else. And part of the Stark's Old Way Code of Justice is that matters of justice should be handled by people who are mostly trying to serve the realm and its people, not themselves. In the Stark Code, leadership is a public service role. And I said that the distinction between revenge and justice is one of A Song of Ice and Fire's biggest topics or themes, because it comes up over and over again, explicitly and implicitly, and because it was introduced in the first chapter, which is traditionally where a fantasy story, or any text for that matter, introduces its primary topic. So this justice versus revenge question is not something to be set in the interesting to think about bin. The distinctions between justice and revenge are absolutely primary to what A Song of Ice and Fire is about. And it's no wonder, because those same distinctions constitute the core philosophies of our own societies and justice systems in the real world. And because 99 out of 100 Americans don't understand those philosophies, how or why their justice systems are the way they are, we recognize a phrase like innocent until proven guilty, but when challenged to behave as though someone who's actually sitting accused is innocent, most of us can't do it. We tend to already believe the accused person is guilty, because we think he wouldn't be on trial in the first place if he hadn't done something wrong. But that's the purpose of the trial, is to figure out whether he did something wrong. And until the trial is finished, the only appropriate verdict is not guilty. It's a less than ideal way to do justice, but it's better than any way human beings have yet discovered. Because the alternative way of doing it, presuming people guilty until proven innocent, is way worse. And it's how we did it for most of human history. So, we're all standing together on the back of a philosophical giant. And that's why we need stories like A Song of Ice and Fire, where we can explore these ideas vicariously through the characters and for ourselves. Because that's the best way to learn things. In Anyway, I think I've rambled enough for one episode, and I'm running out of steam. So I'm going to call it here, and I'll pick up with the rest of these notes next time. I still need to talk about Aemon and Barristan, and maybe the defending Queen of Love and Beauty. I sort of gave myself homework when I mentioned those themes. Like the Aerys Targaryen theme, they're the kind of themes that most readers are going to reject out of hand until persuaded. Anyway, thanks for coming, guys. This has been really fun, as always. That was episode 16, Night at the Laughing Tree, part 6. Valar Morghulis and all that good stuff. I'll see you next time.